So this session is not for the weak. We're getting right to it. But I'm going to first have everyone introduce themselves. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to ask you, where do you work, what do you do, and what do you like about it?
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Alex. I work at Bayer Pharmaceuticals. What do I love about it? I think I love most that we have the ability to change people's lives. So you have people who are living with these conditions. I think if you were here in the other panel, you kind of heard it spoke about. But we have the ability to provide medicines to patients in order to better themselves.
Love that.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Nocito. I lead media at Amgen. And what do? I bring together awesome people internally and externally to drive conversations between patients, doctors, caregivers, hopefully to make that human experience that they all have a little bit better, right? And that's exactly what I think is so amazing about what we do, is that in some small way, we're having an impact on that human experience, quality, quantity, each and every day. So that's my spiel.
I'm Lisa Kopp Johnson. I'm Chief Revenue Officer at Deep Intent. I like a lot about Deep Intent. I would say, though, the speed and innovation of which we bring products and technology to market. To Erin's point, what we do is information, and that's critical information. Now more than ever, we want to get to HCPs and patients. And I think that we meaningfully can do that, but in a way that drives also performance for the brands and agencies that we support.
Hi, everybody. Chris Nooner, president of Throttle. I have to, oh, nice. Love that too. The one thing that's absolutely remarkable right here is I was on a stage very similar to this about 10 years ago talking about the future of digital, not even programmatic at the time. And I think there were about 5 people in the room. And now as I look around, it's absolutely packed and it's absolutely energetic. To Alex's point, driving health outcomes starts with identifying the right patient and the physician with the right message. I know it's trite at the right time with the right product. But we are at the sort of nascence of the journey with the patient and the physician. And so what I love being at the first and only identity resolution company in the space, I love changing the ecosystem to drive those better health outcomes.
So let's get started. Alex, your company was in the press a lot about your efforts around in-housing programmatic. Talk a little bit about the opportunities and challenges. And to get into next level, I'm going to ask you also to focus, how do you bridge that gap with endemic partners?
Great question. Thank you for that. So I think it's a 2-part question. So first, let's talk about what we've been able to do and some of the benefits of really in-housing our programmatic offerings have been. Even if you see here, we're all broken into these various different segments, right? One thing that we've been able to do at Bayer by in-housing our media is break down some of those silos. Case in point, we're in these meetings, so you have market access folks in there, you have medical folks in those same meetings, and we're all talking. What we found out was that there is a piece of data that we have a product that has some prior authorization problems. And so we were able to find out that there is some data out there that we didn't know that existed, that allowed us to figure out when a prior authorization was written, that we could actually then start talking to those HCPs. So it's able to get that data in-house, activate it, and work programmatically has been a great thing. The other advantage has always been speed to market. Sitting in the room with the marketers directly, we're able to hear from them right away, and we're able to transact on that information much quicker than, in my past I was at the agency world. And so, then it would be, a game of telephone. Okay, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? Now, we're hearing it right from the source. So the second part, talking about, where the endemic lies. I think, data is king here, right? And programmatically, we've always had scale, but we've never really had that ability to reach, get that high quality audience. And so when you start marrying the endemic side of things, endemics have been great. They have high audience quality, but they don't have the high scale. So if you're able to bring those two together, and in the last panel, Eric, who works at My Health Teams, right? They've gone through a transition of Swoop and My Health Teams kind of merging together. And I think depending upon how that works out, I think you might see that coming from other endemic partners looking at other larger data companies and saying, okay, how can we market our data in order to be a lot more, have much better, higher audience quality.
So the one thing I loved about our prep call was the free flow of ideas that came from the panel. So I'm going to just see if anyone else has anything they want to add.
I mean, I think the discussion around the breaking down of the silos, right, and that enabling speed to market is critical. And however you get to that point, right, whether it's in housing or somewhere in between that and a full outsource model, like that is the key that we need to use to unlock the speed at which we have to operate, right, at this point in time. And so that to me is really critical to how we all work day to day. Yeah.
And I would just say, I mean, just to build upon, I said what I like about Deep Intent is speed, right, where we bring products. But to the point about data, and I think it's also doing so in a privacy-safe, very purpose-driven way, and being able to have that data. And in our case, we refresh the claims data that powers everything that we do on a daily basis. Because what we don't want is that latency, because again, if a patient needs to get on a medication or you need to reach an HCP, doctor visits, right? We want to be able to do so as quickly as possible, because during a person's journey, right, their health journey, it matters when you reach them. And the information that we can provide is very, very critical. So I think that speed piece is critical no matter what we do and how we process it. Again, we're a platform. We're the type of platform you would bring in-house. But collectively, I think that importance of getting the data refreshed in a way that can meaningfully impact that outcome is going to be part of the future and what we should all be aspiring for.
Sure, I'll jump in. Let's think about the definition of programmatic, right? It's enabling all of this. It's real-time data, it's actionable, and it's automated. So if you think about data being able to be passed through systems, whether it's your CRM, your CDP, whether it's your publisher data, whether it's your demand-side platform, it's being able to look at the data and, AI, I guess, how long was it going to take for someone to say AI?
I got it.
Just the amount of data.
Yeah.
It's like bingo, check bingo. The amount of data enables us to sift through the noise in order to find the right signals to drive those patient outcomes. And so the thing that's really exciting, as I'm talking to a lot of the partners, publishers, demand-side platforms, agencies, manufacturers, is the use of the data and stitching it all together and understanding that Dr. Susan at Sloan Kettering equals Susan at Gmail in Meta. And how do you stitch those two together? And so the shameless plug around Throttle is you need an identity resolution company to bring all of that data together in order to do omni, next best, whatever, in order to drive a better journey to that outcome.
Thanks. So Aaron, we are seeing seismic shifts from traditional upfront planning and buying into more malleable and just-in-time buying, things like streaming and programmatic. Can you talk a little bit about how companies like ours are adopting kind of new data sets and structuring buys to be able to enable more efficient optimization and ability to buy quicker and make decisions quicker?
Yeah. I mean, I think when you look at the totality of the video ecosystem, right, the changes in consumption patterns, what viewers, consumers expect of where and how videos are appearing, like that has been changing for a long time, right? And it's obviously been on a spectrum of change. I think our industry, for very good reasons, has been in pockets a little bit challenged to keep up with that, right? In some cases, it's because some of our nuanced audiences weren't quite following that accelerated trend. In the same way, in other places, it's because of what we have to say and how we have to say it, right, kind of presented unique challenges to getting into some of the other video elements that are now part of how we activate daily. But I do think, and especially for Amgen, we have begun to catch up, right, and have made intentional choices to get there. And I think, for us in particular, that has meant looking at the upfront, a very kind of to your point, traditional buying mechanism as part of our total video approach, right? So it's no longer about outside of the timelines, maybe, really expecting something different from the upfront. Those same expectations in terms of flexibility, audience-based buying, the ability to optimize at the speed at which our business changes, at the speed at which patient expectations change, like that had to be built into the conversations we were having with the marketplace, right? And so it's been, a multi-year journey. We're still on it, but there has been progress, and really that means that we can make choices upfront, non-upfront, video, CTV, program, whatever it may be, in a way that reflects what's right for the business and our target versus being in these kind of artificially created silos when it comes to our buys. A lot more progress to be made, right? But I think we're on the right trajectory here in terms of modernizing the conversations that we're having, what our buys look like, and how it's matching to what patients, consumers, customers, caregivers expect of us now.
And I think the technology is really catching up too. It used to be where the access to a lot of this inventory wouldn't be available programmatically. And now it is, right? So the same places where you could reach, on NBC or NBCU, like you can reach those users programmatically. But you've got the flexibility, but more importantly, a holistic look as well.
Yep.
So when you think about waste, right? Not saying that there's waste necessarily in linear, but being able to find those audiences and pinpoint that data-driven approach with that now that access to all that premium inventory, which historically you had to buy in an upfront, that's really changed things. And I think that's what's really exciting. And then when you couple that with measurement and then the speed of optimization, there's just so much innovation that's happening. And to your point, I think there's even more that we can do.
Yeah, haven't been in the room with some of the brand marketers, when you start talking about commitments and like, okay, you need to commit $30 million today in April before you even, launch a product, or anything happens, right? Like it becomes a little bit scary and daunting. So what programmatic allows us to do is really add, we said it several times, is add that flexibility so that we don't necessarily need to be committed, locked in to all of those dollars, and test how video does a little bit before we become some of those.
I'm looking for my team in the room because I think that topic rings very true.
Oh yeah, not just you. I think it's everywhere.
So Lisa, with your focus on pharma first programmatic, how has this ecosystem really impacted the industry?
Yeah, great question. How about the CTV question? No.
No, you get the hard ones.
I'm just kidding. Well, I think first and foremost, Deep Intent is health only, purpose driven. And I think there's a lot that we consider. I think privacy is very important. And the role that we play is that we don't, as a platform, have to try to balance reaching to sell you a car, sell you cheese, and then sell you medicine, right? But really what we do is a very health-first approach, from planning to optimizing to measurement. And the use of that data is really important for two reasons. One, we want to make sure that we are optimizing towards health KPIs, right, powered by medical claims data that we refresh. The other piece, though, is we build our technology in a way to be privacy-first and compliant. We want our brands to have the comfort to know that when they're transacting and within our platform, they can do so with state and federal regulations in mind. Everything is about HIPAA compliant. I think also, too, internally, we put a large emphasis on it. We sit on NAI, we are an active part of the CHC, and we even collectively, every single person, whether they're commercial or not, at Deep Intent gets certified to make sure that we have a full understanding of what privacy means to our industry, but more importantly, how we can translate that back to our brands. So I think what programmatic has done, or what we are trying to do, is that it's not just cheap reach, or it's not something that is kind of scary, but rather you've got that safety of a technology that lives and breathes only for the healthcare industry. And so now you can start to do really meaningful things that drive better patient outcomes and, support the HCPs that are writing for them.
Yeah, when I think about, as Lisa said, it used to be remnant inventory, and now it's cheap reach, right? And now it's a buying modality. I think about the evolution of programmatic, right? I think about the publishers from a remnant inventory who used to put Google's AdSense onto their website just to make sure that they were getting revenue. Then it became a buying modality, which was, okay, now you have your diabetes health webpage.com. No one will have that, thank God. And so I want to actually buy that inventory either contextually or audience-based in order to reach that inventory from a buying modality. And what the industry, like the Deep Intents and the Pulse Points of the world did, was saying, actually, that isn't enough. We need to actually have the privacy and the focus on pharma. And then from an identity perspective, so you've got contextual, mydiabeteshealthwebpage.com, or you got the audience. How are you thinking about things like Washington State or My Health, My Data? And how are you being compliant when you're reaching that audience? So this birth of understanding medical regulatory in relationship to programmatic breeds a whole new industry and a new opportunity. And that's where I think one of the challenges in the space right now is we're using a lot of different identity. And that identity is leading into inconsistency and lack of transparency. And one of the things that I think that the next conversation in programmatic is what it's going to be is from an audience perspective, where is that audience coming from, as Lisa's mentioning, making sure it's privacy and compliant. And we talked a little bit on our prep call, and I plugged Lisa because I have an in-depth knowledge of how they do identity within the walls of Deep Intent. And I think it's absolutely best in class because it has this level of transparency and consistency within the identity. Because Sumana might be cookie 1, 2, 3 in one platform. She might be cookie 4, 5, 6 in another platform. It's not to say the two platforms are wrong. It's just inconsistent. Yeah. And so then when you try to plug in from the development of that audience to the activation all the way down to the measurement, you get mixed signals. And when you're talking about mixed signals in a privacy regulated environment, the walls start to crack. And so what we think is critically important is being able to stitch together that whole ecosystem from the activation, insights, and measurement standpoint into one privacy compliant identity.
So Lisa, I actually have a follow-up. You touched on this and you talked about we're in-house ready. What kind of trends, regardless of whether you're in-housing your programmatic or you use agencies, what kind of trends have you seen over time?
Yeah, great question. I think in the beginning, right, it was kind of like what Alex was saying before. Well, maybe I'm going to put words in his mouth. I'll use myself. Where it was you want to maybe take your performance, right? Or you want to do performance media in-house, but then you collectively want to leave awareness somewhere else. And ultimately, in the beginning, I think it was highly fragmented, right, in terms of how it was bought. I think collectively, though, there's activation, but activation arguably can often be your final mile. And so what I think is I'm going to rephrase the question. I think the opportunity, which ties to a trend, is looking earlier and leveraging technology so that when you're in-housing, you're thinking of what are the different tools to be able to plan, but more importantly, plan against data that makes sense for the business in a privacy safe way, right? And then collectively, how do you actually activate that's meaningful, right? So it's no longer set it and forget it. There are tools, there are platforms, myself included, right, where you can actually have real-time optimization. You can make faster, more flexible investment decisions, and that's meaningful. And 3, 4, 5 years ago, we wouldn't be having that conversation, particularly within pharma, right? A lot of it would be locked up direct. There's a role for direct, but again, how do you look at things in a more holistic, performance-driven way? And then I think the biggest trend that I would say is the importance of getting closer to your data and measurement, right? So understanding your consumer, where they sit in the journey, and what I'm really excited about and where I hope we will continue to see movement on is the intersection of HCPs and patients and how that connectivity can actually impact, right, overall performance against each. Historically, it was very siloed. Where I do see trends and an appetite is how to bring that closer together, both from a buying perspective, but also from a measurement perspective.
And data is the foundation.
Data is at the
for that.
core.
Yeah.
Data is at the core.
That's right. And so, Chris, you touched on identity resolution, which is a big problem when you're trying to measure the success of your campaigns, but everything's fragmented or transactional.
Yes.
I mean, talk a little bit about like what should people be thinking about around identity resolution? How do we do this as an industry?
Yeah, when I think of, starting from the manufacturer, Bayer and Amgen, Merck in particular, since we're looking at the three of you, I think about the ecosystem in which that you're getting data from, whether it's a CRM system like Salesforce is what we typically look at, whether it's a CDP, Adobe tends to lead sometimes Salesforce in the CDP space as well. Whether you're working with a demand side platform, whether you're getting publisher direct, there's two other things that are starting to come up in the ecosystem of technology that we are talking more and more to companies like yourselves about. And it's not only the identity resolution and at its core, but it's the clean room environment as well. And so, our number one competitor ended up bringing a clean room in-house. Our belief, whether you're using AWS or Snowflake, Databricks, our belief is that you're working with a lot of data, and so we will implant our identity resolution into the clean room environment of your choice. But what's important with this clean room environment is the portability and the consistency of that data. So again, to the example with the, Dr. Susan is in your Salesforce now, is portable into Meta through a single throttle, hopefully, ID. But being able to understand all that disparate data and bringing it into one unified ID. And that unified ID not only allows you to push that doctor into Meta in a privacy compliant way, but when that doctor visits your Merck website, that they're able to say, okay, now Dr. Susan's next action was on that website. Let's stitch that back together into the CDP and the CRM. Mm-hmm. And then let's look at that journey holistically and make sure that unified ID can be in the measurement platform of your choice. The biggest ones, IQVIA, Crossix, Health Verity, Symphony are the ones that we are typically working with. But the wonderful thing is that, if our throttle ID is present in the measurement, in the activation, in the CRM and the CDP, then you're able to, again, stitch all of that journey together with better insights, better understanding, and an understanding that your compliance will be thankful for, that they're understanding things like My Health, My Data, in addition to the CCPA and the other rules that are existing, especially in the United States. So I think that ecosystem and stitching together with unification is something that, we're really excited about in the market.
Thank you. Aaron, can you tell us about what are the most valuable metrics that you look at when you're measuring your campaign performance from programmatic channels?
Yeah. So, value in terms of metrics really comes down to what channel, what partner, what placement, what asset in some cases we're looking at, and the role that each of those is kind of playing within our total communications plan, right? Bigger picture though, measurement for us really is, and I think for many, probably a bit of a mosaic, right? You have your lagging, very important but lagging metrics, right? Whether it's ROI, script lift, whatever it may be, attached to your business goal, right? At a business level that you're trying to achieve. And then you have to find a way, as we were talking about earlier, to identify ways to move your activation, to move your optimizations more quickly than those lagging metrics will allow you to, right? So we spend a lot of time with our internal teams, our external teams, talking about that connectivity between the lagging metrics that are critically important for understanding the health of the business, and leading metrics that help us move at the pace that we need to for our patients, for our customers, and for the business as well, obviously. And those are defined by what is actually the role of that channel partner placement asset in the whole ecosystem of our plan, versus having kind of a set it and forget it KPI for each of those walking in, right? And we really try to be intentional about how we're setting those. And refining over time, because as we were saying, as it relates to the upfront or how we're buying and planning media today, it's constantly evolving, right? And we have to be in a very agile state when it comes to what our measurement plans look like as well.
I'd say very similar on our front, where at the end of the day, it is ROI, it is MMX that kind of is the lagging indicator, but the all-important indicator. So we leverage various different forms of whether it be audience quality or the things to pull those levers, right? To make sure, like, what are we doing here in order to make sure that that is going to, at the end of the day, have that positive ROI.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a follow-up. How has that evolved over time?
Great question. It has evolved. I mean, I've been in this industry for a while, so I mean, it's gone from clicks to being able to have more of that data aspect. But I think the pendulum does swing both ways, right? Like, so again, we started with some of these rudimentary early metrics, and then everybody was like, no, it has to be at the end, like it has to be conversions, right? But then we're all like, well, wait a second, that takes months, especially in our industry, to actually see those results. And only that, as you start going down the funnel even more, that end count, that the viability of that data becomes lesser and lesser, smaller and smaller.
Right.
So you can't really necessarily trust, but when you're looking at number of conversions at the end of the day, based upon the actual size of the audience that responded to that. So you need to find a metric somewhere in the middle. And that's why I think we've really leveraged the audience quality and trying to figure out why audience quality is so important.
Yeah, and having data scientists that can help you correlate
Yes.
whatever that metric is super important.
Yep.
And I also think it's the metrics, but it's the path to get there.
Yep.
Right? And so I think that, I'm sure AI, omnichannel, what's our other buzzwords
Check,
we want to
check,
say?
check.
But next best action. But I think too, collectively, and to plug programmatic, the amount of data and information that we can show, what's the optimal mix to actually get to the KPI. And I think that's equally as critical as to what you're optimizing towards. So that you can dynamically make the decisions and think of, what's the right, and it's channel, it's creative, right? It's audiences. And then being able to test and learn in a way that's ultimately going to drive that macro performance that you're looking for towards that metric. I think what programmatic can do now more than ever is that the access to that inventory and quality inventory to do that makes it a really dynamic and almost fun conversation as you're optimizing towards that end goal. Where, I've been doing programmatic before it was programmatic, right? Where it used to be like, hey, let's get our open rates, let's get our click-throughs. We are so past that, and now it's really about how do we use the data to find that end metric that we're looking for too.
I think it's not just the data; it's the channels too,
Yeah,
right? Like,
absolutely.
so
Inventory is
you
just
think
as
of old,
important.
like you said earlier, you think of old school programmatic, right?
Yeah.
That was remnant inventory. Now it's so much more. Like, you're talking about any channel you could possibly think of, like, right? Like, so you
It's
have
minimal,
video,
yeah.
you got point of care, you have you have anything that you could, where audio, we could put it anywhere, right? So it's now it's to your point, it's like taking those various different ads, those messages, and testing them and seeing what channel is the right channel at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, the one thing that's exciting about measurement is that it used to be all around ROI or ROAS, and now we're seeing a much deeper level of measurement. So if you are focused on top of the funnel awareness, so actually back up, we have the ability now to say, did the patient actually go to the doctor's office? Did the patient see the doctor? Did the patient actually get prescribed? Did the patient go to the pharmacy? Did they pick up and did they adhere, right? And so there's different messaging throughout that funnel. And it used to be just, I'm showing an ad and I want to see the bottom of the funnel. But now it's being able to map the journey to the result. And so if it's a launch drug that is not in high demand yet, it's all around awareness, and there's ways to track the awareness. If it's around, conversely, all around adherence, there's ways to measure adherence as opposed to ROAS or ROI. And so we're seeing more of a mapping of where that patient is in their journey. What was my tactic that I wanted to use in order to influence that journey? And then what was the end result? And so that I think is the next, evolution of measurement as well.
Thanks. Lisa, you touched on this a little bit, but I think people probably want to hear more. The privacy landscape is changing every day, state by state. It's like working with 50 different countries, right? So how do you keep pace and ensure that you're compliant with legal, regulatory, privacy? How are you managing that?
Well, it's hard. So we're going to say that. I think anyone could see that there was some news yesterday of things and everything. And the reality is it's not going to stop. 5 new states have regulation coming out between July and January, right? Change is happening. But this is when I will say being purpose-driven and health-focused becomes the advantage. This is all that we do. We don't have to worry about supporting other verticals and building our product to adhere to that state and federal law. And I do think it's also important to note that we have a best-in-class privacy team. We play active roles, and I said it before, on the NAI and CHC. Like, that is critical as we think about not only internally within our walls, but the advocacy that we do outside of our walls to drive that education. Everyone is interpreting the state laws differently, but what we want to do is make sure that we are abiding by it, being in a HIPAA compliant and building products accordingly, but also not in such a way that's going to sacrifice performance for our clients, right, too. So there is that fine balance as well. I think even when, I'm going to say AI, right? But even the use in doing so, and when we incorporate that, it becomes really critical that we take a privacy-first approach. And we also even will use, we have expert determination and outside counsel. So there is no necessarily, I say, one thing that we do, but I'm going to come back and say that because this is all that we do, our entire business is built on this, we lead with that first and foremost in mind, because that's how we build trust with our brands and our agencies that are supporting us.
I think going back to where you started around breaking down silos, right? Now those silos that we have to break down on the advertiser side, it's not just marketing, media, maybe data and analytics, but also data privacy, legal, and bringing them along on the journey with us. I mean, they're going on their own journey with this as news comes out. It's daily, it seems like. But we have to bring them along on the journey as it relates to implications, pros, cons on the media and advertising side as well, data side as well, right? So that we're making comprehensive decisions around risks we are or not going to take.
Right, and it makes our jobs easier at the end of the day, right? Like, so if we already know that our MLR, PRT, whatever you guys want to call it, are on board with these tactics, right, then we can jump into that much faster. So even bringing them on board, like I said, much sooner, sharing like what we're planning on doing so that they're aligned to it, so that we can actually transact on it.
And I want to bring up something Chris had pointed out too, which is just the rise in the role of the clean rooms, right? Because I think there's something so critical about identity resolution and where that data goes, and the technology that we sit upon, but also the technology that we integrate, really ensures in that due diligence that we do, data becomes really important. You need it to measure, you need it to drive, but we also want to make sure we're doing it in a way that protects first and foremost the patients and the providers, identity and their personal information. So that role and the rise of clean rooms and the role that can play in the macro marketing funnel is becoming more and more important. And I think that's actually a good thing, because it allows us to still continue to do, drive towards the metrics and the outcomes that we're searching for.
Yeah, I think about it in 2 ways, operationally and organizational. And going backwards, organizational, do you have the team that understands the compliance that's needed specifically for, let's say, programmatic advertising in healthcare, right? And so then it turns into, okay, you've got the set of rules, how do you implement those rules? And operationally, just some, fun facts, right? We're the only ones who do state-by-state healthcare suppression, right? So when you upload a list into Throttle, example, Washington is already cleansed. You don't have to do anything else, right? And so that gives us an advantage over other identity platforms that wouldn't take that into consideration when putting it in. and being able to continue, the clean room, absolutely, right? And saying, how do you make sure there's no way of re-identification between medical claim data and marketing data, right? You're talking covered entity data and you're talking marketing data. Like, what are the use cases like clean rooms to make sure that everything is tokenized? And you've seen a little bit of a rise, and I don't know if there's any of my friends here, in tokenization in the healthcare space, as well. And so there's new solutions. It's a data van. I'm saying all these names, so I'll continue on. The data van, folks out here. So there's these great use cases where compliance and safe havens, safe ways of using data is being able to handle not only the sensitive level of data, but the proliferation of that data into the systems to make sure that all of our compliance people are happy. Oh, the last thing is just on the consent side, that do you have the consent to use the data the way that you're using it? And I think that is also something, across medical, across activation, across identity, across the whole continuum is being, spoken about more. And so I think that the level of consent and the use of that data is important as well.
So I actually have a follow-up question for you on that.
Okay.
You talk a lot about clean rooms, right? The ecosystem is broad, varied, and wide. Talk about some key considerations. Like, if people are walking out of this room and they're like, you said a lot, I don't know where to start. Can you talk a little bit about, like, how do you go about selecting the right technology partners and platforms in our industry? And this is for everyone, but we'll start with you.
Yeah, and I think, this team knows it, especially, well, is, I think, and it's too generic, so I'm trying to think about a better way to say it, but just focus, and there's too many broad-based companies that are pretending to be healthcare, and they don't understand. And the good news is, on the manufacturer side and the agency side, there's enough compliance people to actually see through it. So just the generic thing is that the number one consideration is, how much of your time is healthcare, right? How much of your time is specifically focused into this? And then the next consideration, as you would waterfall this down, is, trust but verify, right? So then let's go through, whether you're bidding on inventory, whether you're loading an audience, whether your publisher is basically a healthcare publisher. What are the consents that they're receiving on their side? On the medical claims side and on the measurement, is that data allowed to be used in the way that it's being used as well? And so looking at, the next level of privacy across the continuum is, I think, the next consideration to take. And that's, I think, you probably have more, but that's what
Well, he stole my answer.
Oh.
Definitely ask
You
some
stole
of-
my clean room answer too.
Yeah, so what's their focus on health, right? How much of that is spent there? But in action, I completely agree with what Chris is saying, and I know we're probably running a little short on time. It's trust, verify, and then perform, right? We haven't talked about performance. We have, but I think the perform piece is very, very critical. And being able to drive that performance and ensure that what you are doing isn't that surface level from a metric standpoint, but really thinking about how are you actually going deeper into the results that are meaningfully moving the needle from an outcome perspective. But I couldn't agree more with what Chris is saying, but I think it's that trust, verify, and then it's all about that performance.
I'll take a bit of an advertiser internal view, and maybe it's because, I've been building a team for the last 2 or 3 years, but to me it comes down to having the right set of people looking at this set of the consideration set of technology based on what we're trying to achieve, right? And making sure that you're looking at talent profiles and that right assortment of people on your team through the lens of what's needed today, because that looks very different than what was needed 3-4 years ago, right? And so to me, it comes again back to, do I have the right people on my team across those silos that we've broken down really to assess this consideration set against what we're trying to do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I'd say, like, from us, so we have in-house all our media, right? And we rely heavily on our partners. So, Lisa, you talked about the performance part of this, right? Well, that's important. And yes, we expect everybody to perform, but we also expect more than that, right? We expect a great partner who's going to help us, whether it be, within the programmatic space or even with our endemics. So we expect them to provide us with data, help us with other things, so that we can achieve our goals at the end of the day.
So I did have one more question, but I'm getting the hook. So the invisible hook. But so I am going to actually ask us to start to wrap. Future predictions, and we're going to start at the end there. Future predictions for programmatic only.
Programmatic.
We're going to scope it in.
I could go the easy way out and say that identity resolution is going to be at the forefront of programmatic, and it's going to be the next conversation, but that is too shameless, and I was enough shameless. But I think the connectivity is where I'm going to go with this next, which is, we're seeing a proliferation of platforms. Amazon's coming into the space massively. Google is now accepting, HCP advertising. I think we have more and more of a lean in across the industry in accepting healthcare. And I think the connectivity of systems will allow us to do things that we never thought were possible. And it's going to continue to get into broad-based, a lot of data in real-time ways. Lisa, I know AI, and I'll let Lisa talk about that. But being able to sift through the signals in a much broader environment with the right data in order to drive better health outcomes prediction.
So I knew she was going to ask this question. So I was thinking of a couple of stats, and there's a lot we can predict. Something that jumped out, I read a stat, 72% of new approvals of drugs have fallen in rare disease. That's up from 51% in 2019. The roles are changing, diseases are changing. So my prediction is very much, and it's actually in our title, is just the importance of precision and the role of targeting and how that can impact end to end, right, as it relates to patient journey. My second prediction is more of a hope, is how do we drive better connectivity and integrate HCPs and patients collectively, again, as we have these rare diseases and even larger patient populations as well. So very simply, I think programmatic does an enormous amount for our industry and is changing and providing data, measurement, and just ultimately performance. But I do think the role of the targeting and the ability to precisely reach these specific, hard to reach patient populations is where our industry is going, and that's actually what's very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's exciting to me, and somewhat of a prediction is, and we've talked a lot about it today, is there's so much connectivity and so much that has been done and on the horizon as it relates to how data and media work together, right, to fuel how we plan and buy and optimize, in this case, in the programmatic environment. To me, the next horizon that we've kind of been inching towards is how does our messaging and the agility within that messaging start to map back to what we can do in terms of media-based or data-based media buying and planning, right? And so we've made some headway there. I think it's extra hard, obviously, in our industry, right? Rightly so, because of the regulations and how sensitive we have to be with what messaging gets put out there when. But I'm going to say AI. I think the really exciting part of AI for me is how it kind of helps to form that trifecta in a more meaningful way, in a more compliant way going forward. And that can fuel things like a HCP patient conversation that is across a journey that is connected in a more meaningful way as well.
So we're now officially over time, so I will leave it short. Quality in should mean quality out. So the better we can get our data in, hopefully should mean better outcomes for us at the end of the day.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.